Okay, the channel is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis.
I'm Mike Mateen.
Tonight, we are in anticipation of the upcoming part three, long awaited, uh, 28 years later, is coming after quite some time. Not literally 28 years, but not as far off as people might have initially assumed. It is, in fact, just 23 years, because 28 Days Later came out in 2002. But we're talking about 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later. Um, are you excited?
What's that?
Are you excited?
I am excited.
It's funny. One of the things that I like was the first sort of like realization that came after we decided to do this was me misremembering that Danny Boyle actually didn't direct 28 Weeks Later. He was the executive producer, but he did not direct this one because he was busy making Sunshine.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, well, we can get into it, but like a lot of the people that I liked the most who were involved in 28 Days Later are not necessarily involved in 28 Weeks Later.
It's true. I think these two movies are an interesting pair to discuss because obviously one is a sequel to the other. They are related in many ways. However, they are distinct from each other in some substantial ways as well. In some respects, a bit like other sort of high profile first movies and then sequels like Alien and Aliens or Terminator and Terminator 2. I think these two are maybe more similar to each other story wise than those, or like theme wise, but very different production wise.
Yes.
So in any case, I think probably of the two, the one that is, you know, started it all, of course, because it's the first one. But 28 Days Later, I think, is the one that really had a profound sort of impact on cinema. I mean, not only did it sort of mainstream the whole idea of fast zombies, even though, it was one of those things where in interviews, Danny Boyle was very quick to insist that it's like, I never said the word zombie. They're not zombies. They're the infected. But it is, I think everybody knows that that's all kind of, fancy talk because there's a qualitative difference in the experience of them, but I mean, thematically, these are zombie movies. It's not ambiguous. But
Well, and I think what he did with this was give a modern take on like how zombies could actually quote unquote
yeah.
exist, right? Because it's not just like dead people rising out of graves.
Mm-hmm.
It's there's an actual infection that plays to like a different kind of horror,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like
It is.
losing yourself, losing society, like all these things that are then, played out in things like The Last of Us, right? You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm. Well, the whole concept and sort of subgenre of the zombie movie has been expressed in a lot of ways over many years. Like I think the only movies. So we've done Night of the Living Dead, which
hmm
is in many respects the original zombie movie. In the sense that there's technically movies before that you could maybe argue, but just only in the sense of like the concept of the voodoo zombie, for example. But it's really not the same thing that we think of today when we say a zombie movie. And then we did Evil Dead 2, which, has a little bit of overlap there, but is not really the same thing. But one of the things that I've always been fascinated about with the zombie movie is how we have, as a culture, this sort of concept of what's the basic standard zombie, right? And it often, that idea is actually kind of a pastiche of a number of different sources, and that there's really not even any movie that I can think of off the top of my head that actually depicts the zombies in exactly that way. Meaning, think about the, like, what are the, cliche stereotypical zombie idea? Well, like, there's the rotting, slow moving, but then there's like the brains eating part is the part that I think is really distinct, because, for example, in the movie Return of the Living Dead and that series, which in and of itself sort of a soft unauthorized sequel to Night of the Living Dead, that is where the eating brains comes from. But those zombies are also not mindless. Not only can they more or less move like any human would, despite being dead and, you can't keep them down in any meaningful way, but they're also smart. Like, they can speak, they have all of their same intelligence. You have characters who are telling their loved ones, is like, if you knew how this felt, you would let me eat your brain. Which, has its own sort of thematic stuff that it's playing with there. But there's not really like this idea of combining all of those things. But so
Yeah, I
zombies,
think
though. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think the main idea, like, because like you said, the eating of the brain thing just sort of became a cultural thing, even though it's not really what
Right.
most zombies do. But the concept is that they turn on their other humans, right? Like
Yeah.
there's this, yeah, breakdown, like whatever, however you want to look at that, right? Whether
Like
it's
the
eating brains or
contagion element
infecting
of it.
them, or yeah, like
Yeah.
it's, yeah, you. And then I think more of again with the eating the brain thing, like the scary part is like losing your sense of self, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not
Mm-hmm.
even, it's no longer about like rising from the dead. It's about being undead without having been dead.
Right.
Although sometimes they kind of blur it where like they die and then they come back,
Mm-hmm.
but like
Mm-hmm.
the idea is you weren't dead and now you are not alive
Yeah.
in the same way. And now you are pursuing other humans, right? That's sort of the,
Right. Right.
yeah.
I think there's also a theory that I think is worth real consideration, which accuses, in such a, certain parlance, the zombie movie of being kind of inherently like reactionary and frankly kind of conservative, accusing, or like, and I'm accusing it. I don't want to. That's okay. This is not to say zombie movies are bad and people are bad for liking them, but at the same time, there's an element within zombie movies where what is presented is an excuse to go out and kill all of what used to be your friends and family and neighbors, and is often presented as like, oh, look, it's you can go on this killing spree and it's okay because they're zombies now. This dehumanization element, which is made literal in the film by the zombification element, but this idea that you have now created a class of person that it's okay to just go out and kill by the dozens because
Interesting.
they're trying to get you, right? That
Right.
whole sort of thing. And so I think that that kind of a concept is important to sort of reflect on too when we think about what are the themes of these zombie movies, right? And I think that certainly we can see some of that here. But we also often see, as a common element in many zombie movies, is that the people who are here to save you, the other humans, are often, if not more, like, if not the greater threat, then like they're at least as deadly, at least as dangerous as the zombies themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's really what particularly 28 Days Later plays with
Mm-hmm.
is the which is scarier, right? Like facing the zombie or facing the people who are now deciding they're in the right to rebuild society and therefore can make their own rules or take away rules. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I always find so fascinating about this movie is like kind of the way it transitions. Like I feel like its turn is deliberate.
Hmm.
It's noticeable,
Oh, for
you
sure.
know,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's not like a Fight Club turn, right? Where you're like, you
Yeah,
whereas
it's
you
not
and
a
I have gotten
twist. It's
the Fight
just,
Club turn, right? It's
yeah.
yeah, right. It's very like, oh wow, this is now two. It's not two different movies, right? But there are
Hmm.
two different thematic things happening right now, right? Like one is sort of this, and actually there's probably three really, like because there's sort of the stark loneliness of
Yeah,
like,
well, I you got three distinct
yeah,
acts for sure, right?
yeah, yeah.
You've
That's what I was
got
getting at.
Jim waking up and his initial sort of what is going on here, what's even happening, and then you've got Act Two, which is you find the dad and the daughter, and you're traveling with them for a while, and then you get Act Three at this manor estate.
Yeah, but Act One and Act Two are much more similar in what they're doing, right? Like I mean, all of it progresses naturally, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's not as surprising as like what you get the first time you see it when you get to Act Three, because these are the good guys, these are the soldiers, right? Like you're going, wow.
um,
You go from I'm alone trying to figure it out to now I'm with some people and we're forming a group and it's scary and now we
mm-hmm.
have feelings for each other, but like there's people in here who think we shouldn't have feelings for other humans because you're going to lose them. And then when that actually happens, like that all is normal. And then it's like, oh, now we've reached the soldiers, this sort of thing, but it's not exactly what we expected. Oh, it's
Right.
really not what we expected.
Yeah. Well, because like through Act One and Act Two, the idea that the military is going to be who will protect us is like you're trying to get to them because they
Right.
say they're the answer, and then of course they turn out to be the ultimate villain of the piece. Um,
Yes.
but before we get too far into 28 Days Later, let's talk a little bit about Danny Boyle. I've actually been sort of rewatching a lot of his stuff recently, partly in connection to doing these movies, and partly because the Blank Check podcast did an old unit on him that
Hmm.
I've been kind of listening through. But so let's talk a little bit about Danny Boyle because he has quite a career here. His first like big sort of like feature film was something called Shallow Grave, which I hadn't seen before. Starting this sort of exercise of watching some of his stuff, but it's kind of a simple plan sort of deal where you've got these roommates that uh, hire on a person for their one spare bedroom who turns out to be this guy who's involved with a lot of drugs who proceeds to overdose in his bedroom with a great big bag full of cash. And so, of course, the question is just like, okay, well, if you call the police at all, they're going to want to know more about it. But what if you could just hide the body and keep the cash? And of course, things go awry. But that movie has Ewan McGregor and Christopher Eccleston in it, both
Hmm.
actors who, of course, would go on to work with Danny Boyle more than once. Um, and then from there, from the success of that, it's a low budget indie movie that does reasonably okay. And from there, he gets to make Train Spotting, which of course is his big first big hit.
Yes.
Um, and we start to see, his regular cast members because, of course, you got Robert Carlyle in Train Spotting showing up again eventually, I guess, in 28 weeks later, but, other
The
Danny Boyle
beach.
things.
Yeah, he's on the beach.
Yeah. Well, right. So,
I
from
think.
Train Spotting, which was a big hit, he makes A Life Less Ordinary, which was not a big hit. And then from there, he makes The Beach, which, despite having some fans, also not a big hit, despite spending an awful lot of money on Fresh Out of Titanic, Leonardo DiCaprio. So,
The beach is a complicated one though
mm-hmm.
because it's The Beach is probably my most read book,
Yeah.
and they gave it was very popular at the time. I mean, it's very I hate to like say this, but it's like a very definitive like it that book and Fight Club, I think if you break down into their themes, like have so much like Gen X, like
Yeah.
teen, early adulthood, like thematic things that like really hit, right? And so
Sure.
they gave Alex Garland the go ahead to do this. They gave it to Danny Boyle, they gave it to Leonardo DiCaprio. So they took a book that came out of nowhere. They gave the guy who wrote the book that came out of nowhere the ability to write the screenplay. They took a
Mm-hmm.
guy who was up and coming and they tried to pair on Leonardo DiCaprio to take his like huge success and like blow this thing out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And it just didn't hit, right? Like the movie doesn't hit the way the book does. I agree with that. I'll
Mm-hmm.
still watch the movie, but it's not
Well, I
but it's
think
there's
I
a but there's kind of to your point of like kind of where Danny Boyle is in his career. There's a reason all these things kind of came
yeah.
together, and it just failed. Sometimes things fail,
Well,
you know.
so here's a question. I'm fresh off having recently rewatched The Beach, the movie, but I've not read the
Hmm.
book. You having read the book, I don't know how recently you watched the movie. I know you've seen it at least once. Um,
Yeah.
does does
No, he
Richard
does not become a
Leonardo?
video game.
Well, no, that's not actually what I was going to say.
I
I,
thought
I
that
was
was going
going
to
to
be your
say
question.
in the book, does he suck? Because he kind of sucks in the movie. He's not like he like ruins everything he touches in the movie. He's making bad decisions constantly and basically leaves a trail of chaos and turmoil behind him.
So no, he doesn't suck. He does make some bad decisions, but
Yeah.
they feel more natural in the kind of like how you would make a bad decision, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
in the whole so the video game thing is the one that always gets me, like, 'cause it's so dumb. Um, but the other piece
I
that's
kind of
not
like
in
how
the book,
goofy it is, but I
yeah,
get fair point. If you're wanting to take it seriously, it's harder to do that.
the other big piece that's not in the book is he doesn't steal the dude's girlfriend. Like that's not a thing.
Really?
Like
Oh man. Okay. Yeah. See,
yeah, that
that's another one of the big red flags I was going to point to is like why this guy kind of sucks. And I say that as a Leonardo DiCaprio fan. Even then, you know what I mean? It's like it's it's kind of surprising to watch that movie and realize how this guy is just really not who he thinks he is.
right, and that is part of the point of the book is he does deteriorate in almost like a modern day apocalypse now, but not as serious,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like he lets this kind of life and travel and beach and all that thing kind of erode his moral code a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but not, and again, some of it has to do with the fact that like it's internal narration, so you can kind of watch this happen, you can kind of identify with like how he got there,
Mm-hmm.
but also it doesn't have the deliberately like shitty things that he does,
Yeah.
right? Like he doesn't then go and sleep with the girl on the run, right? Like none of that shit's in there. Like, sorry,
Huh.
none of that's in there, right? Like it's just, but the deterioration, the sort of like I'm gonna like the whole thing of like playing at being a guard and all that. Like he thinks he's Apocalypse now
Mm-hmm.
because he is deteriorating, but he's not really, right? Like,
Yeah.
and there's always this sort of like part in the book where you like you feel how he got there and you feel how this kind of sucks,
Mm-hmm.
but like you can identify with it more. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard to
Well,
describe, but
obviously
it's a
we're
book, right? Like it's
yeah.
different.
Yeah, and we're not here talking about the beach, but I guess like one last other point though that I feel like the movie maybe fumbles that cause my I've not read the book, but my understanding is the book probably doesn't also end with the message of, gee, it didn't turn out so well, but remember the good times.
No, and it doesn't. And yeah, it's the ending is much different.
Yeah.
So I'll
Anyway,
just leave it at
anyway,
that.
so the
It's
point
one of my
is,
favorite books. I literally
I
have probably read that book 15 times. So
I know lots of people really like it. I'm making no criticism against the book, having not read it, but I did recently rewatch the movie, which has some interesting stuff going on. Looks like it was expensive. Leonardo DiCaprio was definitely expensive, but it really kind of just does not. it is a huge swing that does not connect.
Yes.
Um,
Part of the
but
reason I spent a little bit of time on this is not only because I'm passionate about it, but
sure.
because it is the Alex Garland
Hmm.
connection
Yes, which is
that,
important because it
yes,
does connect. So
to
the
the point
point
it is like,
being,
yeah.
the beach was such a big swing that just did not work. That Danny Boyle was in a position of saying, "Okay, I need to retool here. What's going on? Like I've made movies that people really liked. This didn't work. What do we need to do different?" And it seems like one of the big things that he decided to do differently is to scale it way back from a production standpoint, which isn't to say to make it look bad, but to just like find ways for it to not be so expensive. One of those things is you don't necessarily cast an existing big star, although it's kind of funny that he ends up casting someone who is not a big star at the time, who has certainly become a big star in the meantime, in the years since, with Killian Murphy. But also the thing that, if folks, if you have not rewatched 28 Days Later in the last 15 years, you may forget it was shot on early digital and looks like it. There are parts of it where it really looks like you're watching somebody's like mini VHS camcorder footage.
Hmm.
Um, it's kind of surreal to realize, oh, right, that is what that movie looked like. I had forgotten before rewatching it. And then there's even a couple of shots where it's almost, it has to have been deliberately distorted to make it look like even worse, like in a stylized way. Like there's one particular shot when they're driving across the country and there are all these like rows of flowers or something like that that are like so distorted that the colors are literally like bleeding into each other and stuff like that. And like even the regular like digital video that they're shooting on wouldn't have looked like that. It had to have made it look like that on purpose.
Yes,
But in
I'm
any
sure.
case,
Yeah.
way cheaper than going to a Pacific island and trying to shoot a bunch of stuff on the beach with water and sand and having it look, visually gorgeous. Which that's one thing to give the beach is that it looks pretty good. It's a like a well shot movie, but expensive. And 28 Days Later, less expensive, especially given that all of these iconic shots of Killian Murphy's character wandering around empty London were literally shot like without permits and stuff. Like they would literally just go in at sunrise, have a bunch of people like just block off a certain street for like 2 minutes, and then just run in and get their shots, and then then run away before everyone could come in and tell them they're not allowed to do that.
It's
So
funny. I didn't realize that.
yeah, so that's one way to save money. Um, I don't know that every single shot is literally that, but at least some of them were. And so it's just a very different stylistic take. But he does still stay working with Alex Garland, whom, before actually doing this, I had not connected the dots in my head that this is also Alex Garland, who then becomes a film director in his own right.
Yes.
Which is, he goes on, of course, to make Ex Machina and Annihilation and a couple of movies since then that people don't like as much. I haven't seen actually. Did you see either Men or Civil War?
I've seen Civil War. It's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard like it's well made, but like at least the criticisms I've heard of it that didn't make me feel like rushing to the theater were just that it was kind of like tone deaf about what the actual sort of situation we're in is. It's like it's imagining a completely different societal problem to be about than anything that's actually happening in our world. Like
I
the
th-
real problem are journalists that are, not willing to engage with the subject and only want to view from a remove.
yeah, I guess you could see it that way. I always thought of it more of like being more simplistic simplistic, like to try to like almost like rhetorical for a broader audience that isn't as like intuitive to, or not intuitive, but like tuned into that kind of stuff, like to try to like show the end game to people who aren't already kind of seeing it, which is probably more of what the criticisms you're seeing are people who truly see these problems already. I
Hmm.
feel like it's meant to try to expose it to more people and using a narrative to do that. I'm not saying it's the best at it. Like it's
Hmm.
fine. Like I'm not I like Alex Garland a lot, and I'm not saying this is the best movie I've
Hmm.
ever seen. It was
Yeah.
fine,
Well,
I,
and like I
yeah,
said, I was only just talking about like what I had read other people say. So
yeah.
I need to probably check it out for myself. I certainly did like Ex Machina and Annihilation quite a bit,
Hmm.
and for that matter, he even works with Danny Boyle again, making Sunshine, which we'll maybe touch on again a little bit.
Yes.
But so we have much smaller cast, no big stars, no expensive film, kind of a lot more of a sort of guerrilla filmmaking approach, so he's really changing things up in that way. And it seems to have done the trick because, all of those pieces plus this, this conception of reinventing the zombie as you've got a lot of the same elements except that now they're not slow moving. Now there's none of this. It's just everything in fast forward, because you also can't even do the zombie movie trope of, oh, someone was actually bitten but they're hiding it, right? Because you turn so fast that
Right.
it's just really like it's like a spreading wildfire. You really can't do that. But it means by that same token that there's just an added level of adrenaline to the whole experience, even while you can still hold on to a lot of the other themes of, like, the spread, the being swarmed, the loss of your civilization, all of those sorts of things, and that stuff just hits, and everything together works together in a way that obviously made 28 Days Later not only just a big hit, but also, even though I think very few other movies decided to take all of the elements as influential. Like I don't think a lot of movies did the hey, let's shoot on cheap digital part. Um, Although I guess you get some here and there, but certainly I think 28 Days Later hugely influential in a lot of respects. So do we want to talk a little bit about the just the story?
Yeah, I'll just say the last thing about
Sure.
like sort of the production of it,
Yeah.
and just again on the Alex Garland front. Like I think the other thing I don't know, and this is again why I talked about the beach earlier. I don't know who. Obviously, a lot of people were involved in the decision making, but clearly somewhere along the lines, people were making a decision to change what Alex Garland wrote in The Beach to make it a better movie, right? And it didn't work, right? And
Hmm.
so what I think, whether that was him challenging himself to like take his story and change it, whether it was a production thing, Boyle thing, I don't know. This he wrote specifically for the screen,
Hmm.
right? So he also took his learnings of what worked in my book and didn't work on the movie and made it work for a movie.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a cool way that it all comes together, right?
Hmm.
So that was kind of my last piece on that. But yeah, the story is pretty straightforward. I mean, Jim, played by Killian Murphy, wakes up 28 days after uh, virus spreads
Yeah.
through Great
We
Britain.
get the little
He,
cold open, right, with the
yeah, cold open, which is really cool. Yeah, he just wakes up in the, because you're again, you aren't used to the starkness of the movie. He's in a hospital. He's by himself. It's you know deserted. It's all very like what is happening, right? The first time you see it, and when you see it multiple times, it's still pretty cool opening,
yeah, yeah.
right? this cold open of like, and then he's ripping the things off of himself, and he's trying to figure out what's happening, and he walks out into the streets of London, and you have these iconic places, and he's stealing Pepsis just because he's so thirsty, and
Mm-hmm.
like he's carrying this like grocery bag full of whatever he's collected, and he's just walking down these deserted, huge expanses of London. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
just so stark, right?
Yeah.
And what we come to learn through the newspaper headlines, things, obviously meeting some people, we start to piece together what happened, which is that through an animal experimentation thing or whatever, a virus spread, which they call rage, which
Mm-hmm.
essentially is what turns them into zombies. It just makes people like super mad and just want to tear people to shreds, right?
Yeah.
Like just kill people, right? Like there's no brains, there's no converting them. It's just this pure animalistic, like kill, kill, kill,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
The one question I always had about it, which is not really like a real problem, like I'm not like this doesn't ruin anything for me, but I think the movies really just don't have an answer for, is why do the infected not attack each other?
yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
It actually was another question in an interesting way for a bit in 28 Weeks Later, which maybe we'll just put a pin in that because we're not really discussing that yet, and it's kind of a later plot point anyway. But it is just the case of like when it's a zombie, the classic zombie. The whole idea is, well, they want to eat living flesh. So, like, once you've become a zombie, you are no longer appetizing to other zombies, right? That's the whole idea. Um, and they're like attracted to the behavior of a living person compared to a zombie. But with the rage zombies, like if the whole idea is that it just literally sends your sort of like adrenaline and rage response into overdrive, it's not clear why you would distinguish between infected versus non infected. But that's fine. It's not a big deal. It's not like this is hard science or anything like that. So um, I'm not that worried about it, but just especially since we're talking about the various tropes of zombies and everything, it's a piece that this explanation doesn't necessarily engage with. Um,
Well, and I hadn't thought of that, but that does make it interesting when you think of like some very good evolutions on this, like um, The Last of Us,
mm-hmm,
right? Where they're not necessarily symbiotic,
mm-hmm,
but like they don't attack each other either,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But there is this sort of pseudo symbiotic nature to them
Right, right.
because
I
they're all
mean,
part of the fungus, right? Like,
well,
and it's kind of
it's
yeah,
parasitic, right? Because
right,
it's based on that real world fungus where there is an actual real fungus that what it does is infect the brains of like ants and make them behave in ways that are conducive to the spread of the fungus's spores.
right.
And
Which
yeah,
means it doesn't need to go to other infected already. It knows the difference because there's no value in spreading to someone who already has it.
yeah, yeah. And so like the whole idea of the quote zombies in Last of Us is that it's like what if that but for humans and turn up the scary knob, yeah, right. But yeah, so like I think there's obviously a lot of different ways that all of this can reflect, and I think that there's a whole spectrum within like how much they want to actually do any kind of explanation at all for what causes zombies across all the different properties. Like for example, in the original Night of the Living Dead, there's sort of like you see someone on TV espouse a loose theory that it's related to some satellite that came down, right? But like, what's the mechanism? Who knows? Is that guy even right? Who knows? And it's basically just like, well, you know, it maybe that's it. Who knows? And it doesn't matter really because you're not gonna, it doesn't change anything about what you're gonna do in the moment to moment, as opposed to others where you start saying like, well, if you really start to say, well, if there is a very specific cause, is that something that can be prevented or blocked or cured even, right? Because that's the
Yeah.
other thing about the rage zombies is that the fact that they're not actually dead. Like I don't think these movies even ever really engage either with the idea that could someone once turned ever regain any level of functionality. Like could you ever be healed from that?
Well, I was actually wondering that as I haven't read much about 28 Years Later, but
I haven't either. I've been basically saying I'm gonna go see it. I might as well just like
right. So what I was starting to wonder watching 28 Weeks Later, where it doesn't necessarily address like could you come back?
hmm
It's do they have any of their humanity left in them,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
is
Well,
there
and
a
introduces
recognition of their loved ones, right? Like
yeah.
there's that it plays with that a little bit.
hmm And the idea of someone who could be a carrier but not themselves, um, affected.
Right.
Which is again, that's something that could happen when it's like a disease vector as opposed to some, more supernatural type of,
Right.
you
So
know.
it's taking pieces that I think could kind of lead into what you're talking about
hmm
into
hmm
this new 28 years later. But
Yeah.
anyway,
But so, we have Jim wandering around empty London, all the way, it doesn't see a single other person until, and part of what's weird is it's kind of like, it's not even just like no people, but it's like it's no dead people either. It's kind of like, well, where did they all go?
right.
It's not like they all got killed somehow. It's where are they? And so he eventually finds, like this whole like swarm of people sleeping in the church, and we have that the priest is the first sort of encounter where that scene is so well tuned because we recognize immediately something's off with this priest. Like he's not right. And I mean, I think we're also primed to kind of know what's going on, but at the same time, I think like if we put ourselves in Jim's shoes, there's still that line of like, okay, clearly this guy's not right. He's not acting normally. He's acting scary, frankly. But the line you cross of going from something's not right with this guy to I'm going to hit him with a bag full of cans. Um, I mean, that's a scary line to cross, right? And I think that it's given the appropriate weight in the movie, especially since he's very quickly thereafter going to be encountering Selena and what's his name, Mark, that are just chopping people up with machetes.
Yes.
It
Yeah, I think
strikes
that's a
me.
really good scene. Yeah.
I don't like begrudge the movie. Like I think there's little things that if you really were inclined to poke holes, you could start saying, well, if the blood is so infectious, that do you really want to use things like machetes? It's going to send it splattering all over the place. But I mean, at a certain point, what you also need is to be able to put them down quickly. So it's kind of a dilemma, I suppose.
Right. And not like if you're just a regular human in England,
hmm
firearms are not an option.
Yeah,
And if they were, bullets are a commodity,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you need something that is not
hmm
going to expire.
Yeah. So we meet Selena, played by Naomi Harris, and Mark, played by, I'm seeing, Noah Huntley. And this whole case of, them giving him, the, the initial basics, them being frankly stunned at, like, how are you still alive at this point without having realized what's happening already? I like just the flavor of their sort of like frustrated disbelief of like, what are you talking about? You don't know what's happening. It seems impossible. But the whole dynamic of him, he's not convinced yet. He needs to go to try to find his family, and the we get lots of good drama with him, of course, finding his parents dead by suicide. But you know, Selena and Mark basically saying that is like best case scenario, honestly, um, because like there's so much worse ways that they could have gone. Uh,
Yes.
but you know, because Jim still doesn't fully get it, he lights a candle or something, right? That's what
Yeah.
draws the attack. And this is where we again see this movie's new version of what happens when one of your allies gets bit, and it's like there's no time. Even though we've seen Selena and Mark as this pair, we meet them together. They seem like they're really close, but then she just immediately. There's not even this moment where he says like, "Do it. I know you have to." He's like, he doesn't have time to process it even before she's just hacking him up.
Yes. I think that scene, like again, just the way it mounts the horror is really good, right? Like there's sort of this the priest one that you talked about, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's the that wakes up others, and then you realize they're fast, and there's lots of them, and then you get to this, and you realize, wow, people were actually choosing to kill themselves rather
Mm-hmm.
than be subject to this. To oh, you're going to have to turn even on your allies who are helping you
Mm-hmm.
fight in this if they get infected because like that all of it just puts you in this very like disconcerting space.
Yeah, and just no time at all to think about it, no time
Yeah.
to come to peace with the situation, no time to be sad about it. You have to do it right away, or else it's too late. And of course, this is also the primer for us to have to be in this situation again later when it's much more painful because it's this dad that we've come to like, played by Brendan Gleeson. So
Mm.
and it just hurts all the more because it's like we understand the situation, and yet this is harder because we don't know this guy, and Selena is isn't there to do it for us. If we're in Jim's shoes, the idea of being forced to be in that situation when it's this guy and you're taking care of the kid who, yeah. So we Mark and, or rather, Jim and Selena find uh, what? So I keep saying the dad. Frank is the dad,
Mm.
Brendan, played by Brendan Gleeson, and um, I'm trying to see if I'm not seeing an obvious in this initial cast list who the daughter was played by. I don't know if she maybe didn't do a lot more. That's strange. She seems like more prominent in the cast that she's
Hannah.
not credited. Oh, Hannah, I guess. Yeah. Okay, there we go. I just seeing like things like activist build much higher on IMDb. But in any case, yeah, the two of them, and we get more stuff about like what are the different ways that you might try to survive, and it's fun stuff too, and it's all this stuff of like all of the containers that he scavenged from other apartments to try to collect water on the roof, but his challenges of like, well, but like it evaporates, so like it rains a little bit, and then before you can really collect any of it, it just evaporates again, and it hasn't rained in 10 days, and I saw on TV you're supposed to be able to do this thing where you collect dew, and I can't make it work, and all of that stuff is, I think that's another thing that is part of what draws people to these zombie movies, is there's that whole thing of like, what is your zombie survival plan, right?
Right.
Which can be a lot of fun sort of to think about, but also just tying into some of those other elements, it like ties into the whole like prepper thing, right?
Yep.
Where it's one thing to sort of fun and talk about it like a joke, but then you get occasionally people who are like, seems like they're not joking as much as maybe they should be. Um, but yeah, so we get that, and then this becomes this whole dilemma of like, well, they seem like they're reasonably safe where they are, but you can't stay there forever. You're going to run out of supplies. It's going to be increasingly dangerous to try to go out and get more. And even then, like, what's the plan? You know, once it's been long enough that you feel like help is not on its way, what are you going to do? And that's where they have this radio broadcast. And I think part of what is great about this movie is its control of tone, because, you know, as we kind of mentioned, you know, we've got this act one, which starts out with this sort of like this slow burn horror mystery. He's all alone. What's happening? What's going on? It's strange, but it's kind of haunting because we don't really have action. And then that spins into like just terror and sadness. But then you get up to act two, where it seems like maybe there's hope. There's this radio broadcast. They say they're the military. They have the solution. They have the answer to infection. They have a safe place to go. And so then maybe it's time for a road trip. And, you know, Frank is a taxi driver, and he's got his taxi, and he knows the way to go, and they're like this little family now. And we're tying in themes of this, like, does it, you know, given that this is a scenario where you might have to hack up your loved one with a machete at the slightest notice, does it make sense? Is it adaptive to be close to people? And this question of like, well, but if you're not close to people, then what are you even surviving for? That sort of question. But we get kind of this almost fun road trip thing. Like there's some action, you know, like the tunnel is sort of scary, but it's scary in a more exhilarating rather than horrifying way, right? And I think like this whole sequence is in some respects kind of fun. Like it's still serious, it's still scary, but we're having like a good time with it. And this leads right on up to, oh, wait a minute, we've got to this place that was supposed to be safe, and it's already overrun and abandoned. Where is everybody? It seems bad. And then just the sheer dumb luck of Frank hears a bird, he looks up, drop of blood falls in his eye, and that's all it takes. It's just that's horrifying scene.
Mm-hmm.
But as again, just like a plot turn to take us into Act 3, Jim hesitating. He doesn't have it in him to just immediately kill Frank, the way that Selena did Mark earlier. And we're with him in that because, you know, we don't want to see Frank dead either, and we don't feel like we've had enough time to process his loss. And yet, but then, of course, who's there to save the day? The military. And, you know, at least initially, seems like they do the job, right? Like they've got it under control. And so that's where we get to this Act 3 turn.
Yes, when they find that the military who have been broadcasting this actually are not luring people there, right? But they're trying to centralize people because they have decided that they would like to restart society, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have taken upon themselves to be God, basically. Yeah. That's not how it opens. They're always kind of creepy.
Mm-hmm.
But they are much more like, oh, here's how our defenses work, and here's how we've stayed alive, and here's how you do this. Like, and so it's very methodical, which is what makes the turn so creepy, is that it is also pretty methodical, right? It's like,
yeah, you start getting this like our first thing is like, well, you do seem like you have reasonably good defenses, but you also said you had the solution to infection. You clearly don't. And so, like, you're bringing people here under false pretenses, so that's shady. We're also just kind of seeing behavior that seems like it isn't appropriate to the situation. You've got, like, frat guy hazing going on. with these guys that just sort of feels like these guys don't have it under control. They've not got this. um, and it's just this slow turn that I think the little detail of they try to prepare the fancy meal for their new guests, and they serve omelet. Oh no, wait! Except the omelet was the eggs. Actually, the eggs were bad, and it's just such a nice little microcosm of how we're feeling at that moment, which is this place feels toxic, poisoned.
Right.
And the uh, as much as it's kind of pragmatic, it's also kind of horrifying that one of their own has been infected, but they've just got him chained up in the backyard, and
Right.
there's like, well, we were going to try to see what we could learn from him, and it seems like it's not very much, but eventually he'll teach us how long it takes them to starve to death, and they're just keeping him back there. And that's kind of awful, but at the same time, I think that's another one of those things where it's kind of awful, but you sort of feel like, I mean, would you kind of want to know that, right? But I think the biggest, sort of red flag of the whole thing is all of this talk about wanting to restart the human race when it's like, it's been less than a month. We don't even know how far this infection has spread. And, canonically, we end up knowing that it has not spread. Like,
Right.
this is obviously not known in the first movie, but what we learn later is that it did not spread past Great Britain. It was stayed on the island. So it was like, and it makes sense why it would, because as much as dangerous as these things are, like, it happens so fast that it's not like someone gets on a plane infected and not knowing it. Right?
Without tearing through the whole plane and then
Right.
crashing. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I know they don't ever show anything like that, but yes, it's like it doesn't make it. Yes,
Well, you have to imagine, is like, how does someone even manage to get on a plane infected? Right? Like, it's so you can imagine. So just the very idea that they are literally already fast forwarding to, this is the new reality, and we have to restart the human civilization from scratch, which means we need to bring women here to have our babies, or that's maybe just the slightly more high-minded excuse, but what they really want is that they're bored and stir crazy and they need women to sleep with.
Yes, and I think this whole sequence like matches like the zombie thing so well, because it's like the whole point of like what makes the zombie scary is like sort of like losing your humanity without actually dying.
Yeah.
These people are not infected, but
Mm-hmm.
they have lost their humanity, and they have put it under the guise of we are trying to save humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yet they are the ones who have regressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just not to really disagree with your point at all, but just like to interrogate the semantics of it, because I think that's part of what it's doing is like, have they lost their humanity, or is this evil all too human?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think it's all part of what it's doing well here.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of probing that.
Well, and of course, we get the conflict of, Jim and one of the soldiers kind of tries to stop this from happening, and they're going to get killed. And we have Selena and Hannah trying to figure out what they're going to do about this whole situation, and we have the sort of the interesting, everybody's doing game theory trying to figure out what's the best thing to do, so you end up in the situation where Selena has given some what's like Valium or something to Hannah, with the hope that just to make whatever's coming less traumatizing, but it results in her being high when the dangerous things are popping off, so you can't rely on her to behave rationally because she's stoned. Um, and so you have all of that sort of thing happening. But then the kind of fascinating idea that the main weapon that Jim ends up deploying to stop these soldiers is freeing the zombie that they had, that they had chained up, and sending him on a rampage through the house, which, and we see him do this with frequently watching him impassively watching this through a window from outside, right? And so it really, in that whole sequence, like, we've been primed to not like these soldiers and to kind of be happy that they're getting killed, but at the same time it just really sort of raises this question of like, well, whose side are we actually on at this point? You know what I mean? Because like, and I don't mean that we're not rooting for Jim to successfully save Hannah and Selena, but I just mean this idea of what are the ethics of using one of the infected in this way. And also, for that matter, I mean, he might as well have just set the house on fire, right? Because in the sense that he has no guarantee whatsoever that Hannah and Selena are going to be safe from what he's unleashed, right? Like, all he can hope for is that it will draw the soldiers away from where they are.
Right.
But it's all sort of very chaotic. And, we didn't really touch on this. I mentioned Christopher Eccleston earlier, but obviously we have him here as the leader of the soldiers, and the one with the vision, mad as it is. And I mean, that's the thing I just kept reminding myself of during that whole final act, was just like, it's right there in the title. It has been 4 weeks since this started, and he is already in Colonel Kurtz mode. You mentioned Apocalypse Now, but like, I don't think the connection is unknown to Garland or Boyle. You know what I mean?
Obviously, like, that's what I'm saying. They used that. That's part of the Beach story that they modified for this.
Yeah. And so I think that having all of this, come together to this big sort of chaotic final thing where Jim himself has to become something less than human. He has to dispose of his empathy for these soldiers in order to do what he's doing, right? And it's like, in that last sequence, who is the one that's acting more human, right? And it's, like Jim is doing what he has to do, but at a certain point, it really does raise some of those questions. And I think, we're still primed, of course, to want it to go well, and yet still be kind of scared by everything that Jim's doing in that last act, I think. Yes. That last, climactic sequence. So as we get to the end, there's obviously, I think probably a lot of people know that there's like 3 different versions of the ending here that are like, have shown up in various TV versions of the movie, or deleted scenes on the discs and stuff like that. I think the canonical ending is that they all make it. That is Hannah, Selena, and Jim, and they make it to this little farmhouse, and they eventually have sewn together a bunch of bed sheets to make a message for the plane that's flying overhead. And one little detail that I absolutely just adore from that is that we see that there's a sign it seems like it's spelling out hell, which already has this sort of like, potent, message there. But then we maybe assume that what they're actually planning to do is to make it say help. But then what it does end up saying is hello, which I think is great, because I think in some ways, if you think about like what really does get a plane to maybe divert and check out what's going on there, help feels more like, well, maybe that's been there for a long time. Who knows, like, how desperate they are or whatever. But hello feels more like, well, maybe that's something under control that could be interacted with. Yeah. But alternate versions, of course, have like I think the main alternate version just has Jim also get killed in that final climactic sequence, and only Selena and Hannah make it to the farmhouse. Trying to
As we
remember.
transition, I'm just gonna go check and make sure everything's good with my
Sure.
baby and whatnot.
Well,
But you
for that
can,
matter, like, do you want to tell the audience part of what's been going on? What's true now that wasn't true the last time we recorded?
I mean, I have a 2 week old
Yeah.
little baby girl, so yep. So
All right.
that's been exciting and yeah,
Didn't mean to
tiring
like
but
put you on the
fun.
spot or
It's all
anything,
the
but
things that you expect. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, but my wife's taking care. I'm just gonna go check and make sure they're good while you kind of transition us.
Okay, sure, sure.
And
So,
I'll be
as we, I found just this little trivia. This is on IMDb here. So, several endings were filmed, including a few in which Jim, Cillian Murphy, is taken to a hospital where he succumbs to his gunshot wound despite efforts by Selena to revive him. Selena and Hannah subsequently leave the hospital together, an open ending that was meant to suggest they would make it. However, a test audience interpreted this as a sign of certain death for them, so the makers filmed a special epilogue with a more uplifting ending. And so I think I'm happy with that. I like the ending, although it's another interesting zombie movie trope of whether or not happy endings are possible, because an awful lot of zombie movies end not especially happily. And this dates, of course, all the way back to the very first one, Night of the Living Dead, where we are meant to understand at the end of that movie that maybe the zombie threat has been more or less wiped out or is back under control, but all of our characters we've been following are not as okay. But so let's talk now. We're going to get ready to switch over to 28 weeks later, and I don't know that we're necessarily going to have quite as long a discussion here, because I think it's in many ways, while I think it's still good, it's a much more conventional movie. It doesn't have that same sort of huge impact that 28 Days Later did. But 28 Weeks Later is made 5 years later, in 2007, and both Danny Boyle is still very much involved, as executive producer, but they make the determination that he's not going to be able to direct it because he's also got his film Sunshine that he's making, again with Alex Garland as the writer there. So 28 Weeks Later has him as the executive producer, but it's directed by Juan Carlos Fresnadillo, and writers Rowan Joff, Juan Carlos Fresnadillo, the director, and Enrique Lopez Lavín. And 28 Weeks Later, although it is a sequel, it has a lot of common elements. From a production standpoint, it is just a very different movie. It's got stars in it. It's shot on modern filmmaking techniques. I don't know if it is actually, on film or digital or what, but it looks like most movies look, as opposed to the very sort of lo-fi, low-grade digital that the first movie was made.
correct.
And it's just much bigger in scope. Partly because it's a sequel. That's kind of the rule.
Yes.
And yes, we've got a viewer in the chat saying, Shotpoint says, I saw the first one but not the second, but that everyone could use Hawkeye in your zombie apocalypse. Because, of course, yes, 28 Weeks Later does include not only other big stars, but we've got Jeremy Renner as Doyle, and we've also got Rose Byrne, we've got Robert Carlyle, we've got Harold Perrineau, and Idris Elba, although I think none of them were quite as big then as they are today, but they were certainly, names for sure. I'm trying to
Yes.
think. Jeremy Renner was obviously like when was Hurt Locker? That was, let's see, 2008. So that was after this.
Yes.
That was when he became like a big star, but he'd been in a bunch of stuff. So you know what? Like now that I'm looking at it, I think that he was, like he was the kind of actor who had been in movies but was not a big star yet. Looks like I think SWAT is probably like the most known thing that he was in before this probably. Even though it
Yeah.
looks like he's in lots of things, but I like don't know any of them before SWAT.
Well, and also Catherine McCormick, who plays the mom, was in Braveheart, Spy Game.
Ah, yeah.
Yep. So again, they were established, but not like
Hmm.
huge.
Um, and then we've also got, like kids in this one, right? Well, I guess Hannah was in the other one, but we've got even younger kids. And boy, just the two kids in this, they weren't, like known at the time, but we've got Imogen Poots, who obviously went on to, to be in lots more stuff. Um, and, but I just, she's got a distinctive name, and I think it's funny that the other kid also has a distinctive name. That her younger brother is played by Macintosh Muggleton. um, but yeah, so we've got names in this one, even though none of them were. I guess maybe in some ways it's a little different than, well, like in the same way that 28 Days Later had people that we think of as names now who weren't necessarily then. I think none of these names that I just read out were as big. Probably Robert Carlyle might have been you know, the biggest
Yeah.
name in the cast at that time, because he had already been in like the Full Monty and stuff, and he was which was the James Bond movie he was in. Um, was it
Uh,
like it was one of the Pierce Brosnan ones, right?
yeah, he was
The World Is
in
Not Enough.
World Was Not Enough yet.
Yeah. But yeah, and then he'd also been like, yeah, so he'd been in lots of things, like the Full Monty, of course, was 97. Um,
Train Spotting, we already
Train
talked about.
Spotting, of course, yes. Also The Beach, also Angela's Ashes. Um, I'm skipping lots of stuff, but just certainly he was, a known working actor doing lots of stuff. But yeah, I think he's probably, of this cast, he's the biggest name in it. I'm looking at Idris Elba. Let's see what had he been in at this time, because he's even in he's in a role that I think well uses his ability to convey gravitas, but it's a relatively small role screen time wise, right? Like it's an
I think he'd been
important
in The
role.
Wire at that point.
Hmm? Yeah,
I think he'd done The Wire already.
let's see.
That won't be in his
Yeah.
filmography, but
Well,
it was the biggest thing that he did.
yeah. So let's see. Yeah, he'd done tons of TV.
The Wire being the biggest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, The Wire was the most recent, and certainly, like, I think he's a major character in that, not just like a guest for 2 episodes or something like that. Looks like, yeah. So he hadn't been in very much other than that yet either. Like he'd been in lots of TV, but was not a big star at that time. Probably Rose Byrne was pretty young too. I don't know if she'd been in a lot yet. Harold Perrineau had been in probably Oz at that point, and in 2011, Lost, right? So he would have been, like, he might have been up there too, right? As far as like people know him, because he was on Lost. Um, but in any case, it's a cast that is certainly a bigger cast, and it's got people that people going to the audience has seen before, even if it's not necessarily quite as much of a cast of big stars as it might look at first glance. But maybe that's just a reflection of Danny Boyle being someone who you know, I'm not sure if it's him or if he's his casting director, but he tends to work with people who go on to do lots more exciting things.
Very true.
Yeah. So
So
anyway,
yeah. Anyway, yeah, I was gonna say everything's good here, but I can't spend another hour on this movie
yes,
if
no,
that's
I understand. Yeah, and I was just actually saying during the transition that we probably won't have as much to say about this one as we did about the first one. It's not as influential, and although I think it's good, I think it's not the groundbreaking thing. It's kind of just it is a much more conventional sequel to this really innovative, quirky original. Um,
yes. And I think what it does is, I think one of the things we talked about is that it sort of it sets up the asymptomatic carrier, which
mhm.
allows for this to now become a bigger problem,
Yeah, yeah,
which is where we get to be excited about 28 years later.
yeah.
And where does that go? Because this film ends with the son
Yeah.
getting going to France
Hmm.
and the outbreak in France starting, so
Yeah. Although we also see that outbreak in France seems like it starts from the infected running through the channel.
oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But you're at the same time, as we had just been talking about, like part of why the virus had initially been kept to the island was this thing about how the infected would turn and become, so recognizably affected so quickly that it was, in some respects, easier to contain them within certain, uh, conditions. But the presence of someone who's infectious but is not obviously infected is a big game changer in that way. And I love just the idea of taking heterochromia. I think is the term for when someone has two different color eyes.
Hmm.
And I wonder if people who have that like this about this movie, because it's kind of almost stigmatizing in a way, you know what I mean? But I think just as a visual, we have already seen how the eyes of the infected change by becoming just like extreme bloodshot and red, and watching the visual of someone with two different color eyes and only one of them is kind of getting, bloodshot on just like half of it as sort of a visual representation of the virus taking hold but not being able to fully convert. I think that's
Hmm.
just a really cool visual, and it's part of why, of course, we've got that in the poster, which I've got, on the stream here if you're looking at it. So we've got the poster of 28 weeks later just really prominently shows the two different color eyes. But so we start with this first sequence, which is Robert Carlyle and his wife, and it's a scene that's basically really deliberately evoking the first movie. It's meant to be taking place at around that same time frame, but it sets up this whole dilemma of a situation where everything starts to go awry, but we end up in this moment where it seems like Robert Carlyle maybe could have gone back to help his wife, but chooses not to and runs away instead. Now, I think I think it's well handled in the sense that it does certainly convey that for him to go back for her would have been dangerous for him, right? Like it's not like a trivial thing where he is just a scaredy cat and he runs away, right? Part of what it is that she is insisting on staying back to protect this kid they've brought in at great risk to herself, and him trying to go back for her is a non-trivial risk. But I think it's well handled in the sense that we can simultaneously understand both why he doesn't go back for her, but also why he would feel some profound guilt about it, and why he might have difficulty explaining it to anyone else what happened. Because, of course, then when we flash forward and now he's been reunited with his kids who were out of the country when the whole initial thing happened, they ask him what happens, and he basically lies to them, saying that it was much less ambiguous than that. he suggests that she was already gone, like she had already been bitten, and it was too late, and there wasn't anything he could have done, as opposed to the truth, which was just that he kind of made a calculated, selfish risk, or calculated, selfish decision to not take the risk. Um, but that really, I think there's some good drama there, and it really plays into what happens when we are establishing this whole new sort of resettlement area. I think there's some interesting world building going on there with, like, okay, all of the known infected have starved to death. It's been long enough that they can't really feed themselves in any meaningful way. They've all starved to death, and so how do you go about trying to resettle, especially knowing that, like, even if it's not a situation where the infected are still around, their bodies are, and there's also maybe some concern of, like, well, those bodies, even if those bodies can no longer transmit the rage virus, there's now still disease vectors of all sorts of other more conventional diseases. There's rats and stuff like that, and so it's a non-trivial thing to try to resettle, and so all of that stuff's fun, but there's a lot made of him, Robert Carlyle's character, bringing his kids, and everyone else, they're the first kids brought back, and everyone else is kind of a little bit like, well, is that really a great idea? And sure enough, it turns out it's absolutely not. These kids are endearing and perhaps sympathetic, but also make terrible decisions that doom the world. So, what are you going to do? It is absolutely those kids' fault, right? They break the containment just because they're it's interesting, actually, perhaps to question if they take the risk to leave the safe zone to go back to their old house because, in the effort to not overly scare them, they perhaps underscare them.
Right.
But also, it's true, nobody knows that they're going to find their mom at their old house, and that she will be this weird carrier version of herself. I mean, like, nobody could have predicted that. But also, all sorts of other terrible things could have happened to them.
Yes.
And the fact that they were able to get out in the way that they do is just, again, I'm not trying to put too much blame on them, but because they are children, but it's also just, it's unambiguous in this movie that all of the bad things happen because of them. More than one scene where that's true. But they find their mom, and this, of course, brings the whole. We get this. I think it's just great stuff of the drama now of Robert Carlyle's lie is going to potentially come to light. This desperation the kids have to want to see the mom. Robert Carlyle wanting to talk to her, to apologize, but also say, maybe you don't have to tell the kids that I just really lied about it, or, like, what are you thinking about it? Are you okay with me? What's going on here? But they're kept away from each other because of this whole question of, like, the military saying, this is crazy. She's a carrier. She's half symptomatic, half not. What are we going to do about that? And Rose Byrne, as the doctor, is very much insisting, well, we need to study her to figure out, maybe she's got a cure. And Idris Elba is saying, nope, we've just got to pull a bullet in her head, and that's it. And while they're arguing about it, Robert Carlyle, with his janitor's keys, breaks in there, kisses her, converts, and we have this horrible, horrible sequence. And this is the bit that I say horrible, I mean horrifying, as opposed to, like, poorly done, right? This is the bit I was raising earlier with, do the infected attack each other? And I remember thinking, when he becomes infected from kissing her, what how will he react to her? Will he treat her as another infected or as a living person? And of course, we see that the answer is the latter, is that while she is still restrained and strapped down and everything, that he kills her pretty horribly. Uh, and then, of course, we've got the whole big outbreak, action, 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 and that, the movie really kind of doesn't stop with the action at all after that point.
No, I think really the only like kind of the last thing I kind of put on this that I think was really interesting and carrying it into the other one is that there's sort of this ambiguity of whether he recognizes his kid
Mm-hmm.
and is stalking and also hesitant to kill. Like it's never quite there, but it's
Yeah.
almost like there's sort of I think it's one of the things the film does really well is
Mm-hmm.
it leaves like sort of this veil of like, is there an understanding that's my son,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's
right?
definitely following them with more persistence and apparent awareness than we've come to expect from these
Yes.
infected.
So
Um,
that's where I'm interested to see if they take that into the can you be cured
mm-hmm.
in the next movie.
Yeah.
Because if you have that part of your soul
Mm-hmm.
still, then there could be theoretically a way that you could be brought back, right?
Yeah.
So
Although, so it does seem nonetheless though that he is still trying to kill them. Like he does kill
oh
his
yeah,
wife.
no, I
Yeah.
don't think
Yeah,
yeah,
and
by no
so
means is this
right.
movie, but it's
But no,
almost
I
like it
agree
plants
that
that
it does
seed of
suggest
recognition.
that there's something of the original mind and memory in there.
Yeah,
Um,
that's all I'm saying.
yeah, and so I think as we kind of discussed, the rest of it is kind of just action set pieces that I think a lot of them are, they're pretty good. I think one interesting sequence is that we get. I think it's Mark in the first one who tells a story about something that he experienced, which was everyone is in a subway station or something, and it was dark, and then when it started being, people started, getting infected, you couldn't tell who was who, and nobody could get anywhere, and nobody could move, and it was just told as this horrifying monologue. But of course, in this one, we basically see a sequence like that. They actually put it on film, which is interesting and does feel very scary. I think by and large, I think this one is scarier than the first one. Maybe that's partly just because I know the first one better, and so I was like kind of more attuned. I know what it's doing already. There's fewer surprises, even though I have seen 28 Weeks Later before. But I kind of feel like it's scarier. If
It's a different kind of scary, right? Like
you
it's
know,
the first one is more supposed to be like this is unpleasant, like where things are going, where this is meant
mm-hmm,
to be just like the guy that we liked,
mm-hmm.
sort of, even though he was kind of shitty, but we liked him, is now killing everybody, and that's all that kind of stuff. So
It reminds me of uh, I don't know that this is precisely the difference here, but it just made me think of the difference between horror and terror.
hmm
And so one description here, this is from just Wikipedia, is saying that horror is the feeling of revulsion that usually follows a frightening sight, sound, or otherwise experience. By contrast, terror is usually described as the feeling of dread and anticipation that precedes the horrifying experience. That's a little different than other places that I've seen um, describe it, but it is just kind of there is a different vibe in the scares here because it is just much more of a like high octane action situation. And again, we kind of gave as a touchstone earlier Alien and Aliens, right? Where Alien, there's just the one, and it's stalking everybody, and it's moving relatively slow, and you don't have these pitched gun battles and big explosions in quite the same way. Whereas everything is like turned up a notch for Aliens, and then same with Terminator 2 versus Terminator. In this one, you've just got everything turned up. I think I just maybe I think part of it is just this different vibe and working on me differently, and part of it was also just I've seen 28 Days Later more often than I've seen 28 Weeks Later. Right, which I think until I rewatched it just now, I hadn't seen it since it came out. But in any case, though, we get lots of you know like fun stuff, but like ultimately it does kind of leave us on another thing I was just touching on when we were transitioning and you were checking on family business was this question of like, do zombie movies get to have happy endings? And the answer often is no. I think 28 Days Later feels like it ends on a happy ending, even though obviously lots and lots of people have died, but it feels like the hero characters we were following survived and it seems like they're going to be rescued. This one, is a lot less optimistic, right? Like, even though these two kids have survived, the younger kid is clearly symptomatic and that feels like a ticking clock, time bomb counting down. Especially since one of the things that I couldn't help you know what? I think what I kept thinking in that whole final act of this one is this kid is covered with blood that's even like everyone else should be aware is infectious, even if the kid is not acting infected, it might just be a matter of time for him to go like, and then now he is, right? Because he's got it all over him.
Right.
And nobody suggests that they get him like a handy wipe or something. There's no reaction at all to that. And now we kind of know that like part of what's going on is that he is in fact infected and just nobody really understands how that works really. Rose Byrne was the one that kind of was getting there but then gets killed before she can really tell anybody exactly what's happening or how it works. Oh, that just reminds me again of the night vision sequence, which I have ambivalent feelings about. What did you think about that sequence?
It's fine. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't
I
think much too much about it.
I mostly just felt like it went on too long. Like the imagery was
Yeah.
interesting, but then it just kind of kept going. Um,
Yeah, that's fair.
but and I don't know. Maybe it was also something that like would have felt fresher in 2007 than it does today. Um,
Also true.
Yeah. But so in any case, of course, we end this one with not only our younger kid infected and probably likely to communicate that to someone else before they can get him to someone who would would be able to do anything about it or help figure out anything about it. And then of course we also get the all of the new infected break containment, run through the channel, and now we've got mainland infection. So bleak, bleak. We'll have to see how that all plays out. What is the new situation, state of the world in 28 years later? Well, we'll all find out in a couple of weeks, I guess. So,
Yes, we will.
all right. So, are we ready to figure out what we're doing for next time?
Yes.
So, one thing that felt to me a little bit like an interesting way to draw a connection here is you mentioned having rewatched The Martian and suggesting maybe like some kind of a space theme. And I mentioned, as I said earlier, I've been rewatching some Danny Boyle stuff, and I specifically had also rewatched Sunshine, which is the movie that Danny Boyle made, was making, which is why he couldn't make 28 Weeks Later. So
Well,
that's another.
the interesting part about all of that is I didn't mention space movies because I rewatched The Martian. I
Oh,
rewatched
okay.
The Martian because I'm reading the newest book by the author of The
Oh, is
Martian,
that which one is that? That's Project
Project
Hail
Hail
Mary.
Mary.
Yeah, I've heard good things about it. You liking it?
It's very good, but the funny thing is that the premise of it is based on, for lack of like, it's not much of a spoiler. It's right at the beginning. There's essentially like this space fungus that
Mm-hmm.
is drawing energy off of the sun,
Okay.
which is of course the plot of Sunshine, is
Huh.
that the sun is losing energy. So they're tied
Okay.
very much together.
Well, so
And
that's
Project Hail Mary is already being made as a film with Ryan Gosling as
Okay.
the main character. So
All right. Well, so I think that feels like enough of a connection that it could be a fun way to explore that. So, The Martian and Sunshine, and what would we want to pick a third or even a fourth?
I mean, I have time sometimes where I'm just trying to stay awake and be alert, but
Yeah.
not do something super.
Because some of the other
So I could do.
movies. Oh, oh, go ahead. If you
I mean,
have
we could do
ideas.
Annihilation
Hmm?
if you wanted to do it. Tie an Alex Garland thing into it. Um,
Well, it's not really a
Armageddon,
space movie.
Gravity.
Annihilation. Gravity is
Not
one of the ones that came to mind for me. Interstellar. Um, uh, and then, of course, there was those dueling Mars movies that even before The Martian, where we had Mission to Mars and what was the other one? Red Planet came out like the same summer.
yeah.
We
That'd
could
be
do
fun
an
to do
all Mars
Gravity.
thing, The Martian,
With
and
Gyllenhaal.
yeah.
Uh, I think Gravity be good.
Hmm.
Um,
I mean, Gravity, The Martian, and Sunshine. That could work.
yep.
Do we want to put a fourth one on there? We don't have to.
I mean, we could throw one older one in there just for fun and do like
Oh, you
Apollo
know what I
13.
have never seen actually that I know is just one of those classics is Silent Running, 1972 movie with
I was only
Bruce
going back to
Dern,
like
I think.
Apollo 13, but
Okay, well that's good too, but um, I mention it only just because I was thinking about space movies, and that was one that I've actually it's like a classic that I've never seen. But we could also, of course, keep it a little bit more current than that.
yeah,
Want to put
that'll
Apollo
work.
13 in there?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. So Apollo 13, um, Gravity was the other one.
Gravity, Martian, Sunshine.
All right, so uh, those are our next time we'll be blasting off into outer space, and so in the meantime, watch good movies, everybody.
Watch good movies. All right, I'm gonna go help out
Yeah.
upstairs.
Good night.